Good afternoon, Chamber members. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Sabrina Binkley, Head of School at Spruce Tree Montessori and Board Chair for the Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to take a moment, as we do each week, to sincerely thank our executive partners whose logos you saw on the screen before we began our program today. These businesses are truly the backbone of business in our community and a pillar of strength, particularly this year, for the Fairbanks Chamber. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. Now to today's program. Welcome to the Fairbanks Chamber's Political Forum for candidates running for Alaska House Seat 1 and House Seat 5. If you can't stay for the whole hour today, or you missed any of our previous forums, recordings of all 2020 Fairbanks Chamber Forum can be found on our website, fairbankschamber.org. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce is a nonpartisan organization which advocates for the conditions that will allow businesses of all sizes to prosper in our region. We are focused on the betterment of our members by working with all levels of local, state, and federal government officials. Our goal for our political forums is to help you in the audience understand your choices during this fall's election cycle. The candidates here today will appear on the ballot for the November 3rd general election. Please note, as always, you have a choice to vote in person or by mail. You still have time to apply for an absentee ballot for the general election. You can apply online at elections.alaska.gov. And once you receive your ballot, it may need a few extra days to travel through the mail, so today would be an excellent day to fill that form out. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's forum. She's volunteered to lead today's discussion. Sarah Obed is the chair of the Fairbanks Chamber's Government Relations Committee. As Senior Vice President of External Affairs, she is responsible for representing Doyon Limited on a wide range of matters before federal, state, and local governments. She is also responsible for reviewing and analyzing legislative issues that may impact Doyon's business. Ms. Obed also oversees corporate and shareholder communications, including print and digital media and press relations. Prior to joining Doyon, she served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Republic of Vanuatu, an island nation in the South Pacific. She is also a program officer for the First Alaskans Institute. Sarah holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in American Indian Studies from the University of Washington and a Master's in Public Policy from the University of Michigan. A Doyon shareholder and a Minto tribal member, Sarah and her husband Stephen are raising their daughters in Fairbanks. Welcome, Sarah. Thanks for doing this today for us.
Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate the welcome and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this forum. I'd like to kick off the forum with a word of thanks to our political forum series sponsors. And they include the Alaska Oil and Gas Association, Doyon Limited, Hale and Associates, Hedgecock Group Real Estate, and MAC Federal Credit Union. These organizations support informed voting and encourage you to engage with important issues facing our state. Before we get started, we have a quick message from one of our sponsors, MAC Federal Credit Union.
Hi, my name's Angie, and I'm the President and CEO of MAC Credit Union here in Fairbanks, and I want to ask you to vote. Your vote is important and it matters. I know there's a lot of noise and confusion in the media right now, but take your time, research the issues, and make sure you get out and vote. And if you need to vote by mail, make sure that you understand what dates are out there to get your ballot in and get it counted. Thank you.
I would also like to thank the candidates who have joined us today. I want to personally thank you for your willingness to serve in public office, and for the work that you do on behalf of the residents and the businesses here in the Fairbanks area. As I introduce you, please wave so the audience knows who you are. The candidates running for, let me say everybody's name. Bart Laban, Representative Bart Laban. Assembly Member Christopher Quist.
Hello.
Mr. Kevin McKinley. And Representative Adam Wool. The candidates running for House Seat 1 are Representative Bart Laban and Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly Member Christopher Quist. The candidates running for Alaska House Seat 5 are Mr. Kevin McKinley and Representative Adam Wall. Thank you for participating, candidates, and welcome to the forum. Now let's do a quick review of our event format. The candidates will each be asked a series of questions that are either a short answer or yes, no. Each candidate will have the opportunity also to ask one question to his opponent. And we have also reserved time at the end for audience questions. If any of our online audience has questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the chat box on YouTube, and the chamber staff will review the questions and select a few to ask the candidates. So it's good to do that early in the process, because if you try to type them in at the end, we won't have a chance to review them. We have limited time here today, so I encourage the audience to engage directly with the candidates outside of this forum to learn more about them, their philosophies, and their vision for the state of Alaska. Now, to the candidates, I have a few last-minute instructions before we begin. As I ask each question, I'll give you a time limit. I'll also indicate what order you will answer in. Candidates for Seat 1 will always answer back-to-back, as will candidates in Seat 5. This will help viewers understand their choices for each seat. As each person has finished speaking, I will indicate the next candidate, just in case you forget the order. I'd like to remind you that our official timekeeper will start the timer on the screen when you begin speaking. I ask you to please stop when the time is up so we can cover all the questions. The timer will briefly flash red if you're in the middle of the sentence when the time expires, and you can finish your sentence, and we can then mute your line and we can keep the forum moving along. Okay, with that, let's get started. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to answer the introductory question, and we'll start with Seat 1. In alphabetical order by last name, this will be Representative Laban and then Assemblymember Quist. Then we'll continue with Seat 5, Mr. McKinley, followed by Representative Wool. The question is, if you could guarantee one piece of legislation to pass in 2021, what would it be and why? Representative Laban, please start us off with your 30-second response.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for this opportunity. Last session, I sponsored a bill for the Municipal Bond Bank to allow access to the University of Alaska to refinance their debt, plus to fund the construction of regional health organizations for rural health benefits. Both would save the state of Alaska and the university money on debt refinancing and improve rural health.
Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. If I could have one thing pass in the new legislature, it would be a reform of our oil and gas tax structure. Regardless of the outcome of ballot measure 1, even if it passes, it's far from perfect. And we need to retool our oil gas tax structure here in Alaska such that we can make sure that our legacy fields keep producing and that we're stimulating investment in new fields, while we're making sure that we get the revenue necessary for essential state services and a sustainable PFD for generations to come.
Mr. McKinley. Sure you hit that mute button.
Sorry about that. If I had my choice of having one piece of legislation passed, it would be a constitutional spending cap based off of revenue. I think that we need to have some type of restraints on legislative spending. Thank you.
And Representative Wool.
Thank you. And also thank you for hosting this event. I'd much rather be at the Carlson Center with you all in person, but this is the next best thing. If I could pass legislation, a guaranteed piece of legislation next session, it would be to continue work on a new formula for the PFD. I've introduced a couple bills over the last couple of years. One was based on oil revenue. The other was to come up with a new way to divide the POMD draw PFD being part of it, education part of it, university part of it, capital budget part of it. It's a big dragon to slay, but until we solve the PFD problem, it's really hanging over every other decision we make in Juneau.
Thank you all for that opening question. We now have a series of questions that are based on the Chamber's advocacy agenda and the issues that are raised by the Chamber members. And we anticipate that our next question may dominate the coming legislative session. So we'll have 90 seconds to respond with a detailed answer. We'll start with seat 1 again, Assemblymember Quist, and then Representative LeBon. Next, we'll move to seat 5, Representative Wool, followed by Mr. McKinley. Here is the question. In 2017, the Alaska Supreme Court unanimously stated that the legislature's use of the permanent fund income is subject to normal appropriation and veto budgetary process. The question is, how would you prioritize the use of the permanent fund earnings in state budget discussions? Please be specific about what level of PFD you think is appropriate and which state services would you cut to pay for it? Assemblymember Quist, 90 seconds are on the clock. You might want to hit that mute button to start the 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. Hopefully I'm the only one to get that wrong this time. So recently the earnings from the corpus of the permanent fund became the most significant source of revenue for our state. And that sovereign wealth fund is going to be increasingly important as the state moves forward into the future. I would prioritize the use of that fund in the way that I hear when I talk to folks here in the district, that they want to make sure that our revenue is going to fund our university, our flagship university here in Fairbanks, that is going to fund public education so that public schools are not adequately funded, but that they're also future funded so that kids going here have a safe and good place to learn and grow. And as far as what cuts are necessary in order to fund a dividend, I think that we've already in many ways cut too far. And I also think that most of the folks here in this audience and a lot of people out there own a stock that pays a dividend. And if you owned a stock in a company that paid a dividend and that company wasn't currently being profitable or was on lean times, you wouldn't expect a dividend at that time. You would expect them to tighten things up and come back stronger and be able to pay a sustainable dividend in future quarters. So what I think we should do is pay the largest dividend that we can possibly afford while simultaneously being sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Representative LeBon.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for that question. I chaired 3 subcommittees for House Finance this last 2 years in the budget cycles. One was for the Department of Public Safety. One was for the Department of Revenue, which included agencies like the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation, and also the budget for the Military and Veterans Affairs Agency. Pick the winner or the loser out of that group, and there's 18 agencies to select from. What I suspect, given our tight budget environment, all the agencies are going to be subject to some type of a budget reduction. How much is anybody's best guess, because once you get down to Juneau, you're negotiating with 40 House members and 20 senators to arrive at these conclusions. The likely outcome regarding the PFD debate is that there very well could not be one this next year. And I know a lot of folks don't want to hear that, but it's also partly predicated on the price of oil going forward into the next fiscal year and the throughput of our pipeline. What is our total revenue picture going to look like when we sit down in Juneau and we hammer out the fiscal year 2022 budget beginning this coming January?
Thank you, Representative LeBon. Representative Wool.
Thank you. This question really is at the core of all that we have to do down in Juneau next year. as many of you know, if we have a $0 PFD, we'll have a $300 million deficit based on revenue projections. Some of those revenue projections are even less than what they thought we were going to be. Production in the pipeline is down a little bit, although the price is up. So that can change, but I think we have to make some hard choices. We have cut about $1 billion in the budget over the last 5 years. That's about a 20% reduction, and that does not include capital budget, which has also been cut drastically, which affects jobs. I support services. When Governor Dunleavy proposed his massive cut 2 years ago in 2019, we had a massive outpouring from the community, both in person, phone calls, emails, etc. We had many community meetings, and almost to a person, everyone opposed these drastic cuts, including education and the university. And let's remember, we are a university town. The university is central to our economy. It's central in District 5. It is in District 5. I do not support cuts to the university. My opponent in a Newsminer survey said he does support those cuts. I do not. I would rather put that priority of education, public safety, roads, and all these things above the PFD. Now, PFD is important and we should maintain it, but these other things take priority.
Thank you. Mr. McKinley.
Hi, and thank you for the question. And this is the question that is on everybody's mind, whether it's to the legislature or whether it's the citizens of Alaska. And I think that the permanent fund dividend does deserve some priority. I do think that we need to, as far as the level of the PFD, I think a POMV and some type of split, and that split should be after inflation proofing. And whether you want to argue whether it's a 50-50 split or whatever that split is, I think that that's something that needs to be decided in the legislature. And I think that when you start talking about, the other thing is that one of the things I hear when I'm out talking to people is that we need to change the statute. That would be SB 26, stating what the PFD should be. I think that's something that the legislature needs to address at some point in time. I also think that we need to start looking at more equitable ways of funding our government and making it fair for everybody. I do agree that the university is very important, and I also believe that we need to come up with sustainable revenue generating and sustainable budgets for the future of Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the candidates for responding to that question. I do think it will be very interesting to see the outcome of the end of next legislative session. I just want to remind our audience out there that if you have a question you'd like our candidates to respond to, please make sure you submit them in the chat box. And if you don't submit them in the chat box early, we might not have a chance to get them before it's time to answer audience questions. We're also now going to take our first candidate to candidate question. So each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask his opponent a question, and the opponent will have 60 seconds to answer. If desired, the asking candidate may take 15 seconds to address the answer, and the opponent may have an additional 30 seconds to clarify. So we drew the order of these candidate to candidate questions before the broadcast. So we're going to start with Representative Laban. Candidate to candidate questions will be interspersed throughout the rest of the program, and they'll go in order. After Representative Laban, it'll be Assembly Member Quist, then Mr. McKinley, and finally Representative Wool. Representative Laban, you have 30 seconds to ask your question.
Thank you, Sarah. My question is, during the 2018 election, I won my race by only one vote. Up ballot from me, Democratic candidates all won their races over the Republican challengers. Ultimately, the House was forced to organize in a bipartisan manner. If the 2020 election mirrored the 2018 election and Mr. Quist won with Republicans winning up ballot, would he join a bipartisan coalition in the state house? Why or why not?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important question. We don't know exactly what the shape of the coming legislature is going to be. In all likelihood, we are going to have to build some kind of coalition. And I'm willing to work with all parties that are truly interested in the future success and growth of the state of Alaska. And I'm willing to do that in a bipartisan way. One of the reasons I'm a member of the Alaska Democratic Party is that we have a big tent. We bring in all the voices, and you can speak your mind. You can advance what policy you think is best for your constituents. And that's the same kind of attitude that I plan on bringing to Juneau. Hopefully that answered your question. I would be happy to try to clarify that if you wanted to sharpen it up some. Thank you.
Am I allowed to ask a rebuttal question?
Do you have a 15-second response?
Yes, the question is, if the House organizes with a Republican majority and a Republican Speaker of the House, would you caucus with Republicans in this next session?
So the answer is a qualified yes, in that I will caucus with anybody who is committed to the success of the state, but I will not caucus with a Republican majority that is committed to undermining the success of this state through unreasonable cuts and rubber stamping the governor's agenda. So hopefully that's clear enough. And if I don't know how to make it more clear, I will caucus with anybody who wants to invest in the success of the state. I will not caucus with parties that have made it clear that they want to cut their way to the bottom.
All right, so we will have more candidate questions, but our next question will be again for all candidates. Seat 5 will start us off this time, Mr. McKinley, followed by Representative Wool, and then seat 1, Representative Laban and Assemblymember Quist. You will have 60 seconds to respond. Here's the question. In 2020, the politically polarized atmosphere seems to emphasize defeating one's opponent by any means rather than passing productive legislation. At the Fairbanks Chamber, we're interested in seeing the work of the government get done, even if nobody gets everything they want. The question is, what actions will you take to improve compromise and bipartisanship in our government? Where can you see opportunities for compromise in the upcoming legislative session? Mr. McKinley, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. And that's a really important question because we have seen polarization in the legislature, and it's been really a slow moving process in Juneau. And I do believe that the biggest way to improve people working together is inclusivity and including others and talking with others and make them a part of the process. And you have to be able to work with others. And sometimes those are in your own party. And sometimes that's working with the other side of the party to get some things done. And you've got to have good communications. You've got to be able to work with people. And I think that the biggest part of the process is going to be the budget. And that's going to be where the most opportunities are for people, legislators coming together and working together. And I think that's where the biggest part that we need to work on for us working together to get things done. Thank you.
Representative Wool.
Thank you. I think it's a great question because there is a lot of polarization going on. However, there are some examples of people working together, and I'll cite a couple really quickly. Our coalition, which has been, I've been in a bipartisan coalition for 4 years now. Both Democrats, Independents, and Republicans have worked together in our House Majority Caucus. And believe me, we've had to compromise just to get together. Representative Laban knows this from 2 years ago when we got together. It took us a little while, and we had to put certain things aside. And we also had a goal of being fiscally responsible. SB 26 was an important bill that was passed so that we now draw monies out of the permanent funds value to sustain state government. It's our biggest source of revenue. That bill passed with bipartisan support. It wasn't all Democrats, it wasn't all Republicans. I supported that bill, but not all Democrats did and not all Republicans did. It was a perfect example of bipartisanship working together. I look forward to that in the future. Coming up with a PFD formula is definitely going to take a bipartisan support and compromise.
Representative LeBon.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to echo Representative Woe. Yes, he and I were both part of a bipartisan coalition in the State House the last 2 years. And, you know, I feel that that action was taken as much as for political reasons, but also to support our community. We're interior legislators, and we were looking out for the best interests of Fairbanks. One of my strong suits, I believe, is working well with others. And I would bring that again to the House, however it organizes, depending upon the outcome of elections. That's part of the waiting game, is to see how other districts are electing their representatives. As far as areas for compromise, the most important compromise is just that willingness to sacrifice your own personal best interest, what you think is of highest priority, for the common good of all of the members of your caucus and for your district.
Okay, I thank you, Representative LeBon. I see that we have Assemblymember Quist has a rebuttal script. And just a reminder, Assemblymember Quist is also the last to answer the question, so we'll give him a chance. You have 30 seconds to state your rebuttal of Representative LeBon's last answer.
Thank you. Yeah, so my rebuttal is sort of in the form of a question. I think that voters deserve to know how you're going to caucus and who you're going to stand with. In a recent Anchorage Daily News article, you said that you're Republican and your hope and objective is a Republican majority. And that sounds to me like a license to rubber stamp Governor Dunleavy's agenda. So how does that jive with what you just said?
If you go back 2 years ago, I went down with the full expectation of being part of a Republican caucus. And we spent the better part of a month trying to organize. So one thing I learned 2 years ago is that you just don't know how the politics of organizing the House will play out. So ultimately, all of us, all four of us, are going to have to do what's in the best interest of our district. And we will know how that's going to play out once November 4th is upon us and we know how all the races were settled.
So, you'll have an opportunity to reply to this, I think, as well. But I find that deeply unsatisfactory. I think there's far too much on the line and that voters need to know who you stand with. And that doesn't have to necessarily be a party line. You know, you asked me a similar question not that long ago, and I think that we need to know exactly what your intent is. And are you trying to move this state forward? Or are you trying to embrace the governor's cuts? Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, you don't have a chance to respond, but you do have your own rebuttal card that you'll be able to use once. We're now going to return to where we left off with the last question, and that was for Assemblymember Quist, and you will have 60 seconds to answer the question. And that was about the politically polarized atmosphere.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really important question. It's just one of the larger social and political issues of our time is how do we work together with folks that have very different ideas. And in the last 6 years on the Borough Assembly, it's been a regular exercise in just that, in compromise, in collaboration, working together to build a stronger community for everybody here in the borough. And that's something that I've done recently as presiding officer. I've worked with moderates and I've worked with the most extreme members of the Assembly, co-sponsoring an ordinance with Assembly members Sanford and Legislature to ensure that we have more funding going to our deferred maintenance backlog here in Fairbanks. And that's the same spirit that I will bring to Juneau. I will work with anyone who is interested in investing in our communities and building a stronger, more vibrant economy here in Fairbanks. Thank you.
All right, so zooming in on House 1, we have our next candidate to candidate question, and this is for Assemblymember Quist. You have 30 seconds to ask your question.
Thank you. Representative LeBon, in the Alaska Public Media Forum recently, you said you believe Pebble Mine could be built safely. Senators Murkowski and Sullivan have both come out with the opposite opinion, saying they respect the determination of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that significant environmental degradation and other adverse effects would occur within the Bristol Bay ecosystem. Here again, you stand with the governor and over determinations of qualified federal agencies. Why should Alaskans disregard the opinion of the Army Corps of Engineers?
And you have 60 seconds, Representative LeBon.
Yes, mining is in our past and it's in our future as a state. And I firmly believe that respecting the total process from start to finish is our obligation. You know, today we're talking about Pebble. Tomorrow it could be Anwar, and the next day it could be the Ambler Mining District. We have to give every mining project its full opportunity for disclosure, for safety, to determine its value to communities, just not local communities, but the entire state. Our future is predicated on sound mining practices, and I believe Alaska does it better than any other state or even country in the world. We have proven the ability to develop our resources, and I'm confident that however the final outcome for Pebble plays out, that we will make collectively the right decision.
Okay,
Assemblymember Quist, you have a 15-second
Didn't answer
response.
the question, I'll give you another shot. So what information are you seeing that leads you to the conclusion that Pebble can be developed safely? And why should Alaskans disregard the opinion of the Army Corps of Engineers when this process has played out? Thank you.
Yes,
You have
Steve.
30 seconds.
Thank you. If this were today and we were debating building the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it probably never happened. We need to develop our resources, and I haven't heard that the final outcome on Pebble has been reached. The process continues, the science of the project continues, and we need to allow it to have its final resolution, be it an up or down decision. We need to respect the process.
All right, so this next question will be for all of the panelists, and each panelist will have 60 seconds for the next question, and we'll go over to House District 5. We'll start with Representative Wool and then Mr. McKinley, and then followed by Seat 1, Assemblymember Quist and Representative LeBon. After the dramatic economic fall in early 2020 of this year, some industries have come soaring back, like home improvement stores and Amazon.com, while others have experienced a continuing downturn, like restaurants and tourism. Though many have innovated and adapted to stay open and keep their employees on the payroll, companies can only survive for so long with reduced revenues. The question is, do you support additional federal or state aid to businesses? If so, what is the legislature's role in ensuring that any future aid is distributed evenly and has a meaningful impact on our economy? How will you target support to those businesses, workers, and communities that, due to factors outside of their control, find themselves on a downward or flat trajectory? Representative Wool, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. I do support federal funds to help out these businesses. The state of Alaska did receive a lot of federal funds at the onset of the COVID pandemic. Some of those funds were put to good use. Some of those funds are still unused. The governor came up with an RPL process, and allocated funds based on certain formulas, some of it population, some of it a little more mysterious. A lot of the monies went out to local municipalities, which in theory sounds good. Get the money to the local governments. It'll get to the people that need it more quickly. They know their communities. However, in talking to business owners in Fairbanks and also large institutions like the hospital, they found that the federal money was easier to access, where the money that went out to local governments was a little harder. And they've hit certain walls, especially, for example, concerning the borough, has outsourced it to a company outside, that's made it a little more difficult. I think going forward, we have to come up with a much more efficient way to get money out to these businesses, especially the hospitality, the service industries, and retail industries that are suffering the most. I think they really need help, and we really need to come up with a more hands-on way to distribute funds.
Thanks, Mr. McKinley.
Hi, it's a very good question, and I do support federal aid. I think that we were expecting a V-shaped recovery, and we ended up with a K-shaped recovery. And there's a business sector that is not recovering, that's lagging behind. And we need to target that industry and target those funds to them. Commercial fishing, restaurants, tourism, possibly even the unemployed, that we need to look at, what part isn't recovering. And the legislature, I think, can do that targeting and help with the distribution of those funds. I think that this is important. I think we need to get our economy back and rolling again. And it's important for everybody. And it's important for the businesses that are suffering for no fault of their own. Thank you.
Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. Yes, I do support additional federal and, if necessary, state aid to businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. It's critical for businesses to be able to stay above water during this time. And there's also not just businesses impacted by the pandemic, but businesses impacted by the government's response to the pandemic. So at the borough, a lot of the time we get unfunded mandates from the state. And in a way, these health mandates that have been necessary from the state have also been unfunded mandates on businesses. We need to help businesses be whole. We need to help businesses be able to retain their employees so that folks can stay with their jobs, maintain the insurance that they do have during this global pandemic, instead of having working families looking to put together a budget based on 2 or more jobs. So absolutely, more aid is necessary.
And Representative LeBon.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, more aid is necessary, but most of that aid is probably going to come from the federal government. When I returned from Juneau this spring, I went back to my former bank and helped with the underwriting and processing of SBA PPP loans to small businesses. And the federal government, through the SBA program, responded quickly to help businesses. And then the state of Alaska received CARES Act grant money, well over $1 billion to do the same. The chances for additional federal assistance is now being debated in Congress, but the banks have some options that they can exercise through additional funding through ADA, SBA, BIA, USDA. There's a number of loan programs available to help small businesses, not just in Fairbanks, but throughout our state. And I'm confident those benefits will flow to local businesses.
Thank you. And I just want to state real quick, thank you to all of the candidates who are doing a great job staying on time. We have our next candidate to candidate question coming up, and we're going to zoom in on House District 5. Our next question will be asked by Mr. McKinley, and you will have 30 seconds to ask your question, and Representative Wool will have 60 seconds to respond.
Adam, as I was knocking on doors, Alaskans are thankful for the legislator reversed the soft on crime legislation and have asked why anyone would have voted against it. I couldn't answer them, as I believe we need to be tough on crime and stop the revolving door. Why did you choose to support the criminals?
I chose to be smart on crime, not necessarily tough. Locking people up for longer sentences isn't necessarily the way to reduce recidivism or to reduce crime. The reforms that we passed, actually in many other states, some of them very conservative states like Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, et cetera, have seen savings and reduction in recidivism and crime overall. The problem was we never gave it a chance to work, and we didn't fund the reform side of it. You can't just lock people up and then let them out 5 years later and give them a bus ticket and expect them to go back to life as normal. They need some support. They need housing. They need behavioral health counseling. They need follow-up. You can't just let someone go. And we didn't put those processes in place. The passing of SB 91, the state realized approximately $10 million of savings in the first year because we were locking up less people. Now the opposite of that. We have to open new prisons. We have to increase the corrections budget. And now we have to cut things like the university, but we're increasing corrections. So we're putting money in prisons, taking money out of schools. That's not the priority I want. I want to be smart on crime.
Mr. McKinley, you have a 15-second response.
HB 49 strengthens sentencing on sex crimes against children and drug dealers. Just to mention a few, and I just want to say that I support the victims and not the criminals. Thank you.
Representative Wool, you also have 30 seconds to clarify.
I most certainly support the victims of these crimes. SB 49 did increase the sentencing for sex crimes. We are now the strictest in the nation. Before that, we were in the top 2 or 3 in the nation. So I don't think there's any problem with that. Also, SB 91, which was passed, increased the sentence for murder in the first degree. So we are definitely in the top of the nation there too. So SB 91 increased the sentencing for murder. So it didn't just let criminals out as maybe many people think. It was trying to be a little smarter on crime, so we didn't have the revolving door.
We're now going to move into a rapid fire round of yes, no questions. So our candidates should have in front of them red and green cards. For those of you online who are colorblind, the green mark has a check mark to also indicate yes, and the red card has an X to indicate no. And then if you don't have your cards, you can do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So we'll start with a warm-up question. Within the last year, have you attended an online meeting while wearing work clothes on top and loungewear on the bottom? Okay, now we're ready to start the rapid fire questions. When you know that you're entering a business where you will need to stand within 6 feet of other Fairbanks residents, do you wear a face mask? Ballot measure 1 on the November 3rd general election ballot will increase the state tax rate on oil production and discourage future investment by oil companies in Alaska. Would you encourage someone listening today to vote for this initiative? Do you support increasing the state's outdated motor fuel tax to fund our state's infrastructure needs? Would you support implementing a broad-based tax, such as a state income or sales tax, to pay for state services if current revenue does not cover existing programs? Now, I will read off a list of projects at varying stages of consideration for Alaska. Use your yes or no cards to indicate if you support each one. A road to the Ambler Mining District to the Dalton Highway. The Alaska to Alberta Railroad or the A2A, connecting Canada to our existing rail systems. A deep water port at Nome. The Susitna River Dam. And a natural gas pipeline from the North Slope to South Central Alaska. All right, thank you. Thank you to our candidates. We have more prepared questions for the candidates and one more candidate to candidate questions. For our audience, this is your final reminder. If you have a question you'd like to have asked, please submit it in the chat box now. Because audience selection questions will be selected before we complete the final prepared question. All right. Candidates, you will have 45 seconds to respond to the next question. We'll start with seat 1, Representative Laban, and then Assemblymember Quist, followed by seat 5, Mr. McKinley, and then Representative Wool. The events of 2020 have reinforced the vital services that K-12 schools provide to our community. Having students at school is best for kids, it's best for working parents, it's best for the local economy. Teachers have professional expertise in educational methods, and they are best suited to educate future citizens and train the future workforce when safe. Schools also provide an important service to the economy by providing a safe and productive environment for children. Childcare was a challenge for working Alaskans before COVID-19. With most students in Fairbanks still learning from home full-time now, the need has only increased, and businesses are struggling to accommodate parents juggling childcare and professional responsibilities. Bringing students and teachers and staff back into school buildings safely is a huge task and responsibility. There are costs to rearranging classrooms, provide necessary cleaning supplies, and managing the changes going forward. What level of support should the state of Alaska provide to public schools for these unforeseen costs, and how does this fit into your budget priorities? Representative Laban, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you, Sarah, for that question. And CARES Act money should be eligible to be used by public schools for safety reasons so that students can return to their schools and once again receive the benefit of direct education and the social benefit of interaction with not just their fellow students, but the teachers. There's examples out there of daycare centers, private schools, and religious schools bringing students back. Teachers are back in the classroom. I think there's models out there to work with, and with support through CARES Act funding, I think we can get that job done and put kids back in their desks and in front of teachers.
Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a critical question right now. And we don't need to be listening to politicians about when we should be going back to school. We need to be listening to the science. We need to be listening to medical experts that know what's going on the ground in our communities. That being said, I'm all for getting kids back in school as soon as possible. They have better learning outcomes, and also it's better for our working families so that they can support their families and grow our economy. The state absolutely must support schools when the time comes for students to come back. That being said, once again, we can't rush back. We need to listen to our medical experts and follow their lead. Thank you.
Mr. McKinley.
Thank you for this question. When I was out knocking on doors and talking to a lot of people, this was probably the #1 concern I had that people would talk to me about is the school system and when we were going to go open up, how they were going to open up. And I think that, yes, I agree with Bart as far as the CARES Act money. I think that is an important part of the process. I think this is something that we need to do smart. I also think that we got to make sure that we're not piling cost on top of cost. I think the school systems can look at efficiencies and figure out ways to extend that dollar and make it go further. But I think that helping the schools, providing support for the schools is absolutely a priority. Thank you.
Representative Wool.
Thank you, and a great question. And I there's a lot here to unpack. It's a lot about childcare. It's a lot about schools. It's a lot about funding, when to open schools. I have 2 kids in the other room in school right now, and if my internet connection crashes, I'm pulling them out of school. But they really want to go back to school, and I really want them to go back to school. And other countries have let kids back in school. And what happens in the community, right now our community numbers are going through the roof, so we have to be very careful. But some places that have opened up schools, the community numbers haven't gone up just because of that. So we have to watch that. Schools need funding. They will need more funding. They always seem to need more funding, but some of the federal money can be used to divert some of these COVID costs. And I think we should really try to get kids back in school.
Final candidate to candidate question will be asked by Representative Wool, and you'll have 30 seconds to ask your question, and Mr. McKinley will have a 60-second answer.
Thank you. In the Newsminer survey of August, there was a question about the cuts to the university and talked about the cuts since 2012. And the question was, do you support the budget cuts the university has seen? And Mr. McKinley said, yes, I do support these cuts, whether it's the $25 million for last year or the cuts since 2012. Also in that same questionnaire was a question about the PFD formula, of which he didn't really answer. So my question is, do you support not changing the PFD formula and prioritize that over cuts to the university?
Thank you for the question, Adam. I do think that I stated earlier that the PFD formula does need to change, and that moving it to a PUMV and some type of split, I think that is really important. I do understand that there's cuts that happen with the university. I do think that the $130 million cut to the university was over the top, and I didn't agree with that one. I am glad that the legislature was able to have the cut up into thirds. And I think more importantly, though, that one of the things that needs to be done is that we need to make a premier university. And to do that, we need to have Fairbanks be the premier university and have Anchorage or UAA and UAS be satellite universities. And I think this is one way to do that because our resources are spread thin. And I think that we need to concentrate on UAF. It makes sense.
Representative Wool, you do have a 15-second response.
Okay, I guess on the last point, the appropriation for the university is pretty much one, although recently a little part's been cleaved off for rural and UAS. But since half the legislature is out of Anchorage, anything to do, like you suggested, to move UAF as the main campus and UAA as a satellite campus would be faced with enormous resistance. How would you deal with that?
I think the reason that this makes sense is that UAF has the doctoral program, it has the research, it has the connection with the federal government for grant funding. And when you start really looking at the campuses, UAF is really geared towards being the main campus. It really is. It is the campus, I think, that should be the premier campus. Thank you.
Our next question is an audience question, and it continues on with the theme of the university, which is one of the chamber's top 3 priorities, along with opposing oil and gas taxes. This question, it will have a 30-second response, and the order will be Assembly Member Quist, followed by Representative Laban, followed by Representative Wool, followed by Mr. McKinley. And here's the question. How will you support our university system and vocational education programs? Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll support our university system by pushing back on the governor's cuts, by making sure that our university has adequate funding. And our university is a real jewel, including our CTC campus here in Fairbanks. We need a strong advocate for the university, not somebody who's willing to pull the ladder up with him after they graduated from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Laban.
Thank you for the question. The original cuts to the university 2 years ago totaled $135 million. The House pushed back on those cuts. The compact agreement between the governor and the Board of Regents followed, and that cut was reduced in half. So that was a victory of sorts for funding for the university. I am an alumni of the university. I support it fully, and I'm not pulling the ladder out from underneath me, not at all.
I'm a big supporter of the university, and the Newsminer question said cuts since 2012, and that's not true. I was instrumental in getting them the first budget increase before it was then cut again by Governor Dunleavy. He proposed a $135 million cut. The Regents reduced it to 70. I guess that's a victory, but it's still too much for me. We tried to add money back in the last session in House Finance. It failed. We thought we'd get another bite at the apple on the capital budget. We never passed a capital budget, but I will continue to fight to add monies to the university and keep them vibrant.
Mr. McKinley.
I am a supporter of the UAF, and the difference between, I think, Anchorage and Fairbanks on our campuses is that Fairbanks depends on UAF. It depends on its university. I believe that Anchorage doesn't depend as much as it does, and we have to keep UAF alive. We have to keep it vibrant, and we need to make UAF the premier university. I believe that, and I am UAF strong.
All right, thank you. We have another audience question. We'll have 30 seconds to respond. The order, we'll start with Mr. McKinley and then go to Representative Wool, then to Representative Laban, and then to Assemblymember Quist. Here is the question. The state of Alaska has been operating on a minimal capital budget for years. It generally fails to cover the rehabilitation and development needs of our roads, bridges, and state buildings. These factors shackle the state's ability to move needed capital projects forward, which impacts business and community development. At what level do you feel the capital budget should be funded to address the infrastructure needs of Alaska? Do you have a plan to do so, and how would you improve the process? You have 30 seconds. We'll start with Mr. McKinley.
I do think that the capital budget is an important part of the budget process, and I do agree that it is a way of moving our economy forward, and also it's a way of keeping our infrastructure maintained and safe. And as far as having a number, I don't have a number offhand, and I really appreciate that question. But the capital budget, I do believe, is a very, very important part of the budgetary process. Thank you.
Thank you. Capital budget is very important. We didn't even pass one this last session. I put forward a bill, HB 300, that parsed out the POMV draw into percentages, and the capital budget was one of those percentages. Like I said before, as was the university, as was education. I think I had 10%, which would be about $300 million for capital budget, which historically is low, but it's probably double what we did last year. There's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of deferred maintenance, and we need to continually invest in the capital budget for jobs and for our state.
Thank you,
And I guess I I would add into that, the capital budget, minimum amount should be about 150 million. We need to take advantage of federal matching dollars on the 90-10 split. And we need to find a way to take care of our facilities, our roads, and if it possible, we need to also carve out some of that money for the university for their deferred maintenance bill.
Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. Yes, we need a capital budget, and I think that Representative Wool's HB 300 is a good start on funding that in a sustainable way. When we have a capital budget and we have projects, it creates good jobs here in the community, but it also creates the infrastructure that we need to have our businesses do their jobs. Roads and bridges and buildings are things that we rely on in order to get work done every day. And they're things that our institutions and our schools rely on. We need a capital budget and we need to fund it sustainably.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a privilege to get to know each one of you a little bit better. We will have the chance for 1 minute long closing remarks. This will be your closing comments. We'll start with Representative Wool.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the Chamber for hosting this event. I think they're very important for the community to see the candidates and hear about the issues, and for candidates and everyone to hear everyone's view on these things. I'm running again to represent District 5. This will be my 4th term down in Juneau if reelected. It's not an easy place to be for 3 to 4, 5 months every winter away from my community, away from my family. And I'll be honest, this session, I wasn't sure I wanted to go down, but seeing the condition that the state is in right now and the decision point that we are at, I felt that's really important. I feel my experience in being in Juneau and knowing the issues and being on the finance committee and dealing with things like the PFD and the budget and the revenue structure that we have, it's really important to have someone down there that actually knows a little bit. And also, I feel that my decisions are really important, and the state is in a very, very tough predicament. And I want to go down and continue the good work that we started.
And Mr. McKinley.
Yes, I want to thank the Chamber for putting this on. I think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to get our views and opinions across to the voters. And I think that Alaska has been going in the wrong direction for several years. And this economic situation that Alaska is in didn't just come upon us. Yes, the pandemic has hurt Alaska unexpectedly. But even before that, the state has been having problems. And I think that now is the time to have a change in Alaska. And we need to start going in a different direction. And to really make that change, I do believe that you need to start looking at changing the players and changing the people that are down there and getting some different ideas and moving this state forward and creating a sustainable budget and a sustainable plan for Alaska to move forward with for years. Because the situation that Alaska is going to last for a while. Thank you. Vote for me.
And Assemblymember Quist.
Thank you. I'm running for State House because I think that our state is heading in the wrong direction, and I'm trying to get us back on track again. My folks moved here in the 60s and went to the university, and they fell in love with the place, and they decided to make a life for themselves here, much like Representative LeBon did. And I'm fighting to make sure that we have more of those opportunities for the youth of today and the future, not fewer. My opponent, he is very good at telling you where he doesn't stand. He'll tell we've had this hour conversation. We don't know where he is on a broad-based tax. He's on both sides of Pebble. He won't even tell you who he's going to caucus with. There's too much on the line right now. And I am a fighter. I'm running to fight for Fairbanks, to fight for education, to fight for the environment, to fight for a robust economy. You'll know where I stand, and I'll appreciate your vote. Thank you.
And Representative LeBon.
Thank you, Sarah. And unlike my opponent, I don't live in a fantasy world. We are dealing with a very difficult budget situation in Juneau. Our business model for the last 40 years no longer will work going forward. We need to make some tough decisions, and we need to work with everybody down there and not just cherry pick folks that you think you might get along with better than others. We need to be open to working with everyone across party lines. And I've proven the ability to do that, whether I'm in a Republican majority or if I'm in a bipartisan majority. I can work with both sides of the aisle, and I've proven that without any question. I have a 42-year banking background, business background, graduate of the School of Management at UAF, and I am prepared to do the job that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our candidates for participating in this online forum series, and your ability and your flexibility and your willingness to try this new online forum. I appreciate the candidates and this opportunity to moderate on behalf of the chamber. We ask our audience to get out and vote. And thank you for taking the opportunity to educate yourself about where our candidates stand on each measure. It's been a difficult election year, unusual election year. And if you're not living and voting in House Districts 1 or 5, you can go online and at fairbankschamber.org and see all of the candidate forums. We do have 3 more political forums coming up over the next 3 weeks. The first one being tomorrow, Wednesday, October 14th. And that's with the candidates for State House Seat 2 and 6. And they will also be broadcast live at noon, just like today's event. And then next Tuesday, October 20th, we'll hear from the candidates for Alaska House Seat 4 and then also Senate Seat B, which all of these should be very interesting discussions. We hope you'll join us, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.